Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
We got so much to talk about with James Bullard, of course. Original is St. Louis Fed, with all the research heritage of the St. Louis Fed. His PhD from Indiana University, and he's wearing a boiler-up Purdue pin today.
I know.
With this wonderful new challenge he's taken on. What's the difference between IU and Purdue?
Purdue is number 4 engineering school in the country, so it's MIT, Stanford, Berkeley.
Out in the Midwest.
Purdue, so the medical school is down at IU, but engineering is at Purdue. So it's a great technical university, and the business school is aiming to combine even better than we have with the engineering school and get great graduates.
You're enjoying the private life.
Oh, I am, and it's going very well. It's great to be back on campus and around the students and hanging out.
I want to go back to, I believe it was 2016, and Dr. Bullard, you had a profoundly important paper saying, as Lagarde is saying at the ECB, we got to get off this idiot media micro-analysis of data and look at the regimes that we live in. As we go to this Fed meeting today within disinflation, with the Fed, with the ECB leading with the rate cut, for Jim Bullard, is there a new regime out there right now, post-pandemic?
I do think we've switched regimes. We're in a higher nominal interest rate, higher inflation environment, and I think that means that comparisons should be made more to the second half of the 1990s and the first part of the 2000s than to the 2009 to 2019 period, which was a low nominal interest rate, low inflation regime.
Paul wants to get in here. We're going to tie the bow here, if I can. It's critical. Is this the press conference where we get some form of hint or statement to where Bullard and Clarida are, which is away from the slavery of 2.0%? Do we get a higher, an understanding of a higher run rate for R-starred or for inflation?
Inflation, no, the inflation target will stay at 2%, but inflation itself, I think the ideal policy would guide inflation to 2%, but asymptote, a word that you love, Tom, asymptote to 2%. So you want this gentle reduction in inflation right down to 2%. You don't want to be bouncing above and below 2%. I think you want this nice glide path into 2%. So hopefully that's what we'll get here. And this report today is very encouraging.
And so, Jim, there are folks out there in academia, in practice, in the marketplace that think this Federal Reserve is already behind the curve, that they should have already been cutting now. How do you think about that?
So I've argued that earlier this year. We did get tremendous reduction in core PC inflation in the second half of 2023. It was 4.8% last summer on a 12-month basis. It came all the way down to 2.8%. So in this world, in this game, 200 basis points of inflation reduction over 6 months or so is fantastically large. So you should be taking that into account. You should be reducing the policy rate, but the committee just couldn't find the right moment to do that because all the inflation reports up to now were mixed or even negative. So unfortunately, didn't find the right moment to do that. But this idea that the policy rate is a little too high for where the economy is today, I think makes a lot of sense. So I've advocated for like a technical adjustment. You know, you want to get this idea across that because inflation isn't near 5% anymore, core inflation, it's now under 3%. We can afford to reduce the policy rate, still be restrictive, and get this glide path into 2%, the 2% target.
I'd love to get your opinion on another topic that investors are thinking about, which is this is an election year. And what does that mean for the Federal Reserve as to timing? I mean, a lot of folks are saying you don't want to be too close to the election, so maybe September might not be the right time.
I think first of all, I don't think anybody ever won an election based on whether the Fed did something at the September meeting. So I don't think it matters for actual election outcomes. I don't think the median voter is voting on that. They're voting on much broader issues. So I think that the committee feels emboldened to do whatever it thinks is right at that meeting or any of the other meetings in the lead up to the election. And they have moved in the past during the election cycle, and I think they can do that if they wish this time.
When the Fed does begin to cut rates, how should we think about the next 3, 6, 9 meetings after that? How will they proceed in what may be a prolonged rate reduction move? How will that proceed, do you think?
I think it'd be slow. I think that, at least as of today, you would think that the inflation rate would come down slowly toward 2%, but it would depend on the data and what else is going on, as it always does.
I look at the Fed, and I'm going to be honest, Jim Bullard, you have prodigious economic chops. There's a few other people out there as well. But the fact is, on this program, we've had more than a few guests take a shot at a central bank that seems to be in love with non-economists. Do we need a representation at the governor's level and at the senior levels of the Fed that includes prodigious PhD macroeconomics, or can we go with a more generalist approach?
I think it's great to have a mix of voices and a mix of backgrounds on the committee. I think it really helps. You get too many people like me, and you get in too much in the weeds about analysis. But if you don't have enough of that, then right. You can't do a good job either. And so a good mix is the right way to go. I've learned a lot from my colleagues that have markets experience, and now there's a couple of new people coming on that have a lot of market.
Jim Bullard with us. We continue. He's at Purdue, of course, at Krannert and White, the Mitch Daniels combine out there of their great graduate and undergraduate programs. Here's the history, and you're never going to admit it, but there was a rogue dot. There was dots.
DOTS go.
And you don't know which dot is. You don't know which dot Janet Yellen was, but you knew which dot Bullard was because there was a rogue dot. Have the dots lost their meaning as you protested with your rogue dot? It could barely fit on a Bloomberg screen. Tom Secunda is over in Bloomberg LP aging because you ruined the dot screen.
That's, well, it was a different era. We were talking about regimes earlier. It was definitely a situation where interest rates were low. Around the world, you had negative nominal rates around the world. And I just thought, why don't we just admit that we're in this low nominal interest rate, low inflation regime and project based on that and not try to project that we're going to switch.
Have the dots lost their sell-by date? I mean, is there any efficacy to the dots now?
I think there could be great reforms on the dot plot, but the committee has just not wanted to make those reforms. One thing that's very strange about the dots is that the horizon shortens up as you go through the year. So now you've got a dot plot that really isn't comparable to the previous dot plots because now you've only got 6 months left in the year, whereas when you started you had a whole year out in the future. So
I don't know this stuff. I think it's all just idiocy, and I don't focus on the dots.
It's a great function.
Save
dots
me,
go.
Paul, save me.
I'm trying to explain to my offspring, Jim, that about this is a more normalized interest rate environment. This is where most of the time this society, this economy lives, and they're trying to figure out how to borrow for cars and houses and things like that. Is this, in fact, where we're going to be for some time, do you think, this kind of general interest rate?
No, I do think we're in this higher interest rate regime, and I do think that it's better on the whole. If you think about the second half of the 90s, which was really the best period for the U.S. economy in the post-war era, that had interest rates like we have today, broadly speaking, and the economy can grow very rapidly. We had a great run at that time. And I do think you probably get a little bit better allocation of capital because it's more of a decision about is my project really worth it or not, and you don't get this kind of experimenting around with kind of projects that probably have low payoff.
Your West Lafayette, Indiana,
yes,
has a 3.0% unemployment rate. They're fully employed at Harry's Chocolate Shop. I mean, there's just no question about it. What does urban America, I mean, you and I have talked about this in your offices in St. Louis years ago. What is urban America missing about the vibrancy of the Midwest of this nation?
I think the Midwest is extremely powerful, very populous. It might not all be in one place like it is here in New York City, but really a lot of people, a lot of great manufacturing, a lot of great businesses spread out across the Midwest, and it's a great place to live. And that because you're more spread out, you have better housing markets and better options.
Is there a labor arbitrage still going on right now? Where I'm sorry, we're gonna take the Biden investment program, and that's where we're gonna find the jobs because the labor total cost all in is better.
There's a lot happening in Indiana. One thing that's happening is this I-65 corridor between Lafayette and Indianapolis. If you drive up and down that, you'll see lots and lots of businesses locating there. And we just had a deal with a South Korean chip maker that's going to move to West Lafayette to Purdue.
In studio with us, the former president of the St. Louis Federal Reserve System, James Bullard. He of Indiana University. He of a profoundly important paper, I'm guessing 2016, on the regimes that we face within our monetary policy. Paul, I can report to you at his Purdue, at Harry's Chocolate Shop, right at the top of the menu, domestic cans, they have Budweiser.
I know.
Very important.
Well, Tom, I found another place we're going to have to go to. This could be a busy time for us there. Linwood Tavern Bar and Grill.
Yeah, I've heard. Rachel's mentioned this to me.
I mean, exactly.
3 days
the
a week.
Wabash River's right there.
You study, when you do all-nighters in mathematics,
Linwood
that's where
Tavern
you do them.
That's my kind of place.
Jim Bullard with us. Jim, I got to go to monetary policy here and the measurement of the inflation-adjusted yield. As you mentioned, we had negative rates. Nominally, it was completely wacko when you were, doing the St. Louis Fed. We're now back to a 2%-ish 10-year real yield. Does that impinge on investment in America?
I think it does, and like we were saying earlier, I think it makes people think more carefully about their projects. What is really going to pay off, and you get probably rid of some of the malinvestment or the misinvestment that might otherwise occur with very cheap money available.
Hey, Jim, to what extent does the Fed think about the consumer here? Because you think about the American consumer, we probably have at least two sets of consumers out there. The folks that are maybe, do have some assets, whether it's stocks, bonds, real estate, doing well, maybe even benefiting from a higher interest rate environment. Everybody else who may not have those types of assets or economic support, they're really feeling the impact of inflation. How does the Fed think about that?
Yeah, I think inflation is very pernicious and punishes the lower end of the income distribution very heavily, and you're certainly seeing that and hearing that when you talk to people in surveys. They do not like the inflation at all. They do not like the fact that the price level is up some 19% since 2021, and they're very upset about that.
One final question, blistering question. SK Hynix, they're going to invest in Purdue Research Park.
Yes.
The number one thing in the zeitgeist is America doesn't have the employees to be labor in those factories. Are you confident we can develop highly motivated, skilled labor as we perceive in Asia?
No, I think we'll have no trouble pulling in the right workforce for the South Korean company, and that'll be a major chip manufacturing facility. We've tried to reshore a lot of our chip making, as you know, across the country, so this is part of that effort.
Jim Bullard, two future governors of the Federal Reserve System, Constant Hunter and Julia Coronado, are here. On your way out, say hello. You're hugely qualified. Jim Bullard, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated with the St. Louis Fed.